There's a right time to find out if you have the right insurance, and it's not when you have a fender bender or frozen pipes. No, the best time is before something goes wrong. Like when you first talk to a AAA insurance agent, and they're taking the time to get to know what you need, so that if the unexpected happens to your car or home, you won't get unexpected answers. Talk to a AAA insurance agent at your local AAA store today, or visit AAA.com/insurance to learn more about AAA.
All right, and welcome into week 2 of the NFL season, and we're back here with the Consistently Cashin podcast, a member of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. As a reminder, go ahead and use that promo code CC2019, so CC 2019, to get $5 off your VIP subscription at Big Guy Fantasy Sports. So not only can you hear this podcast, but you'll also be able to read the article in its full entirety, where Ron Rigney and I will provide FanDuel and DraftKings lineup for you to use. Due to, we'll say, some scheduling conflicts here, we have a pinch hitter for Ron Rigney, but we have the pioneer of the consistency concept here started with seasonal fantasy football, moved into the DFS, and then, we've also got it going into the legalized sports betting aspect of things. But Bob Lung on Twitter at Bob_Lung joining me here today for the Consistently Cashin podcast. So Bob, how are we doing this Saturday morning?
Doing good, yeah. It's my first time here doing some consistently cashing, but I know this is a lot of fun, and a lot of people asked about it. I remember telling you guys, hey, I got people asking me already like 2 weeks before the season start. You guys are going to do the consistently cashing, right? I mean, you guys going to be on Saturdays, right? Article Saturday. I'm like, yeah, we're okay. And I just get it as part of the VIP access. Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, yeah. So people were very excited about it. So glad to be a part of this, and should be fun.
Absolutely. And yeah, that VIP subscription at BigGuyFantasySports.com. Get a lot of good stuff there, a lot of good content. You obviously get this Consistently Cashin article, and then you also get the sports betting article. So if you're into player prop bets or looking to get into it, Bob and I also have an article and podcast on that, and we'll actually be recording that shortly here after, so that should be released probably sometime around noon today over at sites like Spreaker and wherever else you can get your podcast at. So Bob, we'll go ahead and jump right into this here, and I'll go ahead first with this first thing we have listed here for the podcast outline here. But as always, we're going to go over the games that we are targeting first. So obviously these are likely going to be a little bit higher scoring, or just games where we feel like we can get a fantasy edge, especially in daily fantasy sports. So I'll go first, and I have 2 here that I'm really looking at. The first of which is the Saints-Rams game. A lot of fantasy potential there. I love Alvin Kamara. I love Cooper Kupp. I think both quarterbacks are viable options in this game as well. And then the second one for me that I'm really looking at here, and it's a little bit of a no-brainer pick here, but that Chiefs-Raiders game should see a lot of points up. That Raiders offense fared a lot better in week 1 than I expected them to. So I'm going to go ahead with trust Derek Carr, and then he'll use Tyrell Williams and Darren Waller to their fullest and put up some points, and they're going to have to keep up with Kansas City because last time I checked, Kansas City has some quarterback that isn't afraid to putting up some points. So should be a lot of points there and some fantasy gold as well. So Bob, what games are you looking at specifically here in week 2?
Well, I'm all in on your idea with the Saints-Rams game. I'm panicking here because I'm trying to bring up my consistency. Why is this not working? Oh my gosh, it's terrible. For Jared Goff, I mean, this is why I was trying to find this. Jared Goff at home, it was unbelievable last year, and he always has been. He never does very well on the road, which was obvious from last week. They had a good game as a team, but he didn't throw the ball that much, and they still won. But when he's at home, this is where he lights it up, and especially against a good offense like New Orleans. So I know we have him down in the honorable mention. I'm sure he's a little more pricier than the Lamar Jackson and Ben Roethlisberger, but I'm definitely high on that game, as you mentioned. But the other game that I think is going to score a lot of points is Seattle-Pittsburgh. I mean, neither one of these teams stopped. I mean, Seattle gave up 20 points and 418 yards passing to freaking Andy Dalton. Come on, man. At home. The Legion of Boom is gone. There's no Legion There's no boom. There's nothing. There's barely an of. So I'm really in on that game. Any Steelers, any Seahawks, I have a feeling that one's going to really kick off and do very well as well.
Yeah, I believe I saw some things on Twitter going out that instead of the Legion of Boom, it's the Legion of Whom these days.
There you go.
Given the dearth of names in that Seattle secondary. But I was kind of hoping you wouldn't pull up that Pittsburgh Seattle game just because I had a little analogy there. But I'll go ahead and just put the comparison out there for you now. Should we be treating Jared Goff almost as a Ben Roethlisberger type, whereas if it's not really a home game, we almost want to definitely look elsewhere? I know seasonal formats you might be a little bit hamstrung depending on your quarterback situation, but especially in daily fantasy sports, if it's not like a super great matchup, is Jared Goff really just a home-only play for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I finally got my report to come up. I was typing something wrong, I guess. In 2018, here's Jared Goff's split. Home, 28.98 fantasy points, 88% consistency. On the road, 17.54 fantasy points, 25% consistency. I haven't seen a difference in splits like this since Ben Roethlisberger. So this is a no-brainer. I mean, every prop bet scenario I can get to this weekend, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in our next show. I am all in on Jared Goff on the over because – and especially when he plays a team. You remember last year, the Vikings game. I think they played the Saints last year as well. It just, when there's another offense on the other side that's worthy. And obviously, as we saw, Panthers put up, 27 points against them, and then only put up 14 against Tampa Bay. So obviously the Rams' defense isn't that strong. So you got to believe this is going to be a shootout. But yeah, no, Goff is definitely a home only.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the games we're looking at to avoid this week. Earlier in the week, I was a little bit skeptical of the Houston-Jacksonville game only because there's 4 men up front for the Texans that I don't have much faith in to protect Deshaun Watson. There is one guy up there that I have some faith in. But looking at the injury reports, it seems as if Yannick Ngakoue, one of Jacksonville's best pass rushers, is going to be out. Their left tackle might be out as well as A.J. Bouye, their number 2 corner. So there is an opening now for some fantasy potential in that game, but I still don't have much action on that one. I know the Texans' pass defense is garbage, so Gardner Minshew might attract some GPPs out there if you're looking for, basically that hit or miss lineup. So there is some potential in that game. D-Hop is going to be shadowed by Jalen Ramsey, but that hasn't stopped him in the past. So really in this game, Will Fuller's a guy that I like. But there's still some questions with him. So that's a game that's just I can understand if you want to target some players in that one, but it's tough for me to find something, especially at the players' price points, that I don't find somebody else in a better matchup I like better. And then the other one for me is Titans-Colts. It's not that I don't think there's fantasy producers on those teams. It's just I don't feel comfortable paying for anybody there. And again, it's a similar type thing. I mean, Derrick Henry seems like, Derrick Henry and Marlon Mack both seem like they're in decent spots. But at that same price point, especially with Marlon Mack, I'll drop down and just get Todd Gurley against that Saints defense. And if I want Derrick Henry, I'll just bump down to somebody else. So those are 2 games I'm having a hard time getting some action in my lineup. So, Bob, are there any games for you here in week 2 that you're just staying away from for one reason or another?
Yeah, well, one of them was the Colts Titans for sure. I mean, I was at the game against the Browns when they played the Browns last week, and certainly there was a lot of penalties, and the Browns made a lot of mistakes in that game without question. But that defense is still very, very tough. They made it very difficult for the Browns to go deep. They obviously forced their offensive line to hold on every play because that was what the call was on every play. But not that I'm angry or anything. Just saying. But that both those defenses aren't too bad, and I feel like that could be a slugfest. I think another slugfest that a lot of people might be thinking are going to go the other way. That Minnesota Green Bay game is going to be a slugfest. Remember Green Bay's defense did a very, very good job containing the Bears. Now I realize that the Bears are not a super good offense by any stretch, but they were just as tough against David Montgomery and that running game and the passing game in Minnesota, shut down Atlanta. So I feel like this, in Green Bay, this could be a low scoring kind of slugfest that we're not expecting normally out of a Minnesota Green Bay game. I'm a little worried. I don't know how much I would put into the passing game there between Cousins and Rodgers. There could be, I mean, I think we'll see some good runs there. Obviously, Dalvin Cook looked good. We'll see if Green Bay can contain him. But, I don't think there's going to be a lot of scoring that one either.
Yeah, so you can look at that over-under for that game at 43, and with the line being at 2.5, you go ahead and crunch the numbers a little bit. The implied the implied total for that game, 43 breaks down to about 21.5, and then you take 2 out. It's basically looking like a 24-19 game. So unless you get somebody with multiple touchdowns, not ideally a game that we're going to look at, especially with other games that are pushing that 50 or 50 and above line. So
that's a good game for your field goal kickers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a field goal and defense game. But moving away from the games, we'll get into some players here in particular that we're finding quite appealing. I'll go ahead and go first for the high price guy. For me, it's going to be, and you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, a bit indirectly, but I'm going to go with Juju Smith-Schuster. I'm all in on Ben Roethlisberger this week at home. That Seattle defense allowed the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers in week 1, and as you mentioned earlier, that was against Andy Dalton with John Ross, who hasn't been good since he came into the league, and Tyler Boyd, not to mention A.J. Green was out. Tyler Boyd, very capable receiver, so not knocking him. It's more so on John Ross there. So my thinking is, I know John Ross is a burner and can get behind the defense when he's healthy, but if John Ross is going to go for 100+ and a touchdown or 2, I think Juju could absolutely go off in this game. If that defense holds up and can not let Seattle have those long sustained drives, I just think what Juju could do in this game, especially after being rather contained against New England in week 1, he's going to want to come out and have a coming out party, and I think he's going to be worth every penny in DFS this week. So, Bob, your favorite high-priced play of the week?
I'm going to go with Alvin. He looked really good the other night at home. Normally, when they're on the road, Breeze kind of will calm down a little bit and not be as strong. But, again, this is against the Rams, and this is going to be a shootout. They're going to need to beat Kamara that he was on Monday night, which was, guy out of the backfield, running the football, just everything to everybody on that team. And, I think while, Barkley's at 92, Zeke is a couple hundred less, but, those divisional matchups become a little bit uglier. I'm going to basically stay with Alvin Kamara and go with the point total. I mean, he had 20 points last week. Wouldn't surprise me if he hits that again this week.
I absolutely agree. I'll definitely have some shares of him too. So, Bob, I'll let you just go right in here while you're in a little bit of a rhythm there. Go ahead with your favorite mid-priced guy of the week.
Mid-priced guy, I'm going to go probably with Austin Eckler. I mean, last week, he just looked really good against the Colts defense, which I thought was a little bit better than I was expecting. But this week he's going against the Lions, with injuries to Hunter Henry, Mike Williams. I mean, Eckler just going to get the ball even more. The Lions are going to try to take out Keenan Allen, which would make sense because of the fact that Mike Williams now is also hurt. But I think Eckler will continue to be kind of used like Kamara is, where he's just, everything. He's a 3-down back, basically. He can catch the ball, he can run the ball, and he looked great the other night. And Melvin Gordon, I think, is kind of looking at himself in the mirror going, you know what? I may not be on this team very long if he keeps this kind of stuff up. So I'm definitely really high on Eckler, and I think his price range is pretty reasonable, if I'm not mistaken. He's 7,500, so he's maybe a little bit higher than expected, but I think he's still a good value at that spot.
Absolutely, and I'm going to stay at the same position too. And if there is, I mentioned earlier, it's a game I'm kind of avoiding, but just being a Texan supporter, I'm going to have some action in this game. But my favorite mid-price play is actually on the other side of the ball. I think if you're going to go anywhere with this Jacksonville offense this week, I think the play is Leonard Fournette. I think he's going to get enough touches in this offense. They are going to lean on him, especially with Gardner Minshew, the rookie at quarterback. Fournette's going to have to stabilize that offense in the running game. And he did have 6 targets in week 1, so I think they'll use him in the passing game as well. And as we saw on Monday night, Houston still cannot stop running backs who are able to catch the football. And also another thing that might not get talked about too much is that the Houston, after the front 4 there, they were all really going for the ball there, and missed quite a few tackles trying to strip that ball out. So Leonard Fournette's a tough runner. He might run through some tackles and break off some big ones. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Leonard Fournette have a nice statistical game against this Houston defense, especially one that didn't generate much of a pass rush in week 1. So he should be able to run some routes out of the backfield. He won't have to sit in there and block. And then secondly, the loss of Jadeveon Clowney exposed that run defense a little bit. I know Alvin Kamara is one of the top 2 or 3 running backs in the National Football League, but I mean, he was having holes left and right, and even Latavius Murray broke off a 30-yard touchdown run. So I think if you want any action in that Houston-Jacksonville game, Leonard Fournette is going to be your guy. So we'll go ahead and dump the price down a little bit here. So we're going to find some guys down in the bargain bin in the cellar of the FanDuel and DraftKings pricing algorithms to see where we can find some value this week. So Bob, go ahead. The favorite low price guy of the week, who's going to be that guy you throw in there to offer your lineup some salary relief?
Well, you always want to look for, where you can go low but still get some decent pricing for the position. And I think basically with the announcement that Jordan Reed will be out this week with a concussion, you got to go with Vernon Davis. Hell, Vernon Davis scored more points than Jordan Reed did last week, even when he was in there. So he had almost 14 fantasy points last week. Jordan Reed had 7. So without Reed there, could he get 21 points? Maybe not. But if he can get 14 points again and only $5,100, I mean, everybody around him is guys like Noah Fant and Kyle Rudolph and Hayden Hurst. I mean, this is all, garbage players. And here's a guy, just quietly sitting there at, $5,100 and only 14 points. Like I said, that Dallas-Washington game is always a slugfest. It's kind of like the Browns-Steelers, those kind of like, Minnesota-Green Bay, all of those games are always kind of a little bit, rougher around the edges, especially it's in Washington. So, Washington actually looked pretty good last week against the Eagles. Had them scared to death for a while, that's for sure. So I don't think this team, we got Adrian Peterson filling in this week. So I think they're going to need their tight end a lot. I think Case Keenum's going to rely on him a lot. So I would love to have Vernon Davis, kind of my low-end tight end, to be able to pay up at some of the other positions.
Absolutely. If you definitely listened to last week's edition of the Consistently Cashin podcast, I mentioned Vernon Davis as well, especially for all the same reasons that you mentioned right there. Did have a touchdown, so it did happen to work out. We'll see if he can strike fantasy gold 2 weeks in a row. But I'm going to go, yours is a little bit more of a, let's say, less chalky play. Mine's going to be very chalk here. But I'm going to go with Mecole Hardman with the Kansas City Chiefs. Very cheap on both sites. And the loss of Tyreek Hill obviously opens up the door for an increased role for him. And Andy Reid has already come out and said that he believes that Hardman can do the job. He'll go up against an Oakland secondary that is likely without Gary and Conley, who's one of their top 2 corners. And then Jonathan Abram also hurt I believe it was his shoulder, and he's out for the season as well. So the Oakland secondary has a couple backups in there. And even if the starters were out there, the one thing you can't teach is speed, and Hardman has plenty of it, making him the ideal Tyreek Hill replacement for the next 4 to 6 weeks. And I would imagine, I believe as early as next week, this is the last time we're going to see Hardman priced where he is. It would not surprise me to see him be closer to 6,000, especially on FanDuel next week. I believe this week he's right around 5, maybe even a couple hundred below it. So I expect a sizable jump next week, so I'm going to go ahead and buy in now while the price is affordable. So, Bob, what we're going to do now, we're going to go with our Week 1 building block. Last week, I believe, Ron and I both believed in Chris Carson. We both agreed on him being our Week 1 building block up against that defense, and thank God he got some work in the passing game. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked out. So, any of your lineups this week, Bob, FanDuel, DraftKings, whatever you're doing, who is one guy that the second you get that lineup, you're plugging it up, you're going right to that position, and you're hammering this guy in, no questions asked?
Well, that's a good question. There's a lot of good ones out there. I probably would go, especially for the price tag, is and I didn't bring him up in the low price, but it was kind of almost a tie, but I went with Vernon Davis. But Sony Michel, I mean, last week, terrible week, 15 carries, and I think he had 14 yards rushing or something terrible like that. But this week going, down to Miami, the Dolphins defense, obviously, they're bringing in JVs from the local high school. So I'm going Sony Michel. I think that this is somebody that you can build around. I don't know how many people were expected to play him. Maybe a lot of people gave up on him. But, if he can get 15, 20 carries, it wouldn't surprise me he gets 100 yards this week against the Dolphins. So definitely all in on Sony Michel.
Yeah, he's definitely at an affordable price point as well. You can get him in there. He's priced right around the same as Leonard Fournette, especially on FanDuel. I do believe my building block, I'm going with Ben Roethlisberger. Over on FanDuel, he's the 11th highest priced quarterback. and I believe he has 25 to 30 point upside in this matchup against the I guess, proclaimed Legion of Whom at this point. So really like Big Ben, and I think pairing up Big Ben with a guy like Sony Michel, especially this week, I think that's a good start to any lineup you're in. Really like Sony Michel on FanDuel. See if he can get a little bit of work in the passing game. But yeah, for me, it's easily Big Ben. I'm riding the home splits. Go ahead and take a look at his clutch game history over the years. And if you see that Roethlisberger earned a clutch game 98% of the time, just assume that it was at home, because that is what Big Ben does. He dominates at home. So what we can do now, wrap it up. This is always a fun part of the show here, and it's a nice little send-off. So, Bob, your bold prediction for week 1. What do you, just go out on a limb, whatever you think is going to happen. It can be pretty crazy. I know last week I was all in on John Brown, which happened to work out, but we've had some bold predictions here in the past where last year when Kansas City was infatuated with running Travis Kelce in the read option, we've had, Travis Kelce will score a rushing and receiving touchdown in the same week. So you can get as bold as you want here, but your bold prediction for week 2, excuse me.
Wow. Tough question. A lot of good people out there with potential, that's for sure. I'm going to go with, wow, that's a good question. I think I'm going to go with Matt Breida having a great game against the Bengals. So I'm going to go Matt Breida gets 150 yards in total offense this week and a touchdown.
Ooh, okay, so then we'll go ahead. I believe I remember seeing his line at 64.5 rushing yards, so we'll bring the Prop Bet podcast over here. So you say 150 total yards. I'm guessing you're going to hit that over then on the rushing yard line.
Yeah.
Okay. Easy enough. So my bold prediction for week 2, I'm going to go to that Rams-Saints game. And it's going to be a little twofold here because I am very high on 2 of these guys in this week 2 slate. So I'm going to go first with Jared Goff. And I believe Jared Goff is going to throw for 400 yards in this matchup against the Saints defense. Deshaun Watson would have thrown for much more, had a couple drops from DeAndre Hopkins, which is just incredibly surprising to say after what happened last year, but a couple other drops, if they didn't drop those, add some yards there, Deshaun would have been well over 300. So I think Jared Goff could throw for 400 plus in this matchup. And then subsequently, I'm going to go with Cooper Kupp. In 2 career games against the Saints, he's averaging 6.5 receptions for 102 yards per game. So I also think Cooper Kupp is going to exceed 125 receiving yards, and he'll also find the end zone. And then I'll piggyback that off with the Rams also win this game by at least 4 points over the Saints. So I know Drew Brees leaving home can be a little bit, statistically making it down for him. But give me Jared Goff at 400 plus passing yards, and then I'll take Cooper Kupp at 125 receiving yards and a touchdown with the Rams winning by at least 4 points. What do you think about that one, Bob?
I can't argue with that. I mean, last year I think he had 5 touchdowns in that game against the Vikings, and so he can certainly put them up when he needs to, and especially when it's an offense that, on the other side is certainly giving them some trouble, and this is the perfect scenario for that. So sounds bold, but I guess it's not a shocker, and to be honest with you, I have Jared Goff in quite a few leagues, so I'm rooting for it.
Absolutely. So that'll be it for the Week 2 edition of the Consistently Cashin podcast. Again, remember, we are a member of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network, so you can check us out over there. And if you want to see the article with our lineups and a couple other guys in with some write-ups about them of guys that we're interested in, go ahead over to bigguyfantasysports.com, sign up for that VIP subscription, and promo code CC2019 will get you $5 off that VIP subscription, taking it down to $14.99, I believe, for the first week. Go ahead and throw $10 in a double up, and you'll have already made over half of that money back here 1 week into your subscription. Have a good feeling about some of these lineups this week. I know Ron has some good lineups in there, and I've had some really good feeling about some of the ones I put in there, especially some of the individual plays. And then if these bold predictions hit, I don't see a reason that we wouldn't cash. So again, we take that consistency concept and bring it to the daily fantasy sports realm. So Bob, I thank you for joining me this week and replacing Ron. I believe Ron might be back next week, but we'll definitely look to get you back on here sometime in the future.
Had a great time. Thanks for having me, man.
Yep, absolutely. And we'll actually make sure you stay tuned because we will have the next podcast released here probably in about an hour or so. So we'll wrap it up there. Best of luck in week 2. And as always, stay consistent.
There's a right time to find out if you have the right insurance. And it's not when you have a fender bender or frozen pipes. No, the best time is before something goes wrong. Like when you first talk to a AAA insurance agent, and they're taking the time to get to know what you need, so that if the unexpected happens to your car or home, you won't get unexpected answers. Talk to a AAA insurance agent at your local AAA store today, or visit AAA.com/insurance to learn more about AAA. There's a right time to find out if you have the right insurance. And it's not when you have a fender bender or frozen pipes. No, the best time is before something goes wrong. Like when you first talk to a AAA insurance agent, and they're taking the time to get to know what you need, so that if the unexpected happens to your car or home, you won't get unexpected answers. Talk to a AAA insurance agent at your local AAA store today, or visit AAA.com/insurance to learn more about AAA.